Here is this moment that perhaps you have already lived. It's December again, and all around you everyone talks about new beginnings, about transformations, about how next year will be different. Social media fills with grandiose promises, ambitious plans, vows that seem more like pleas to destiny than real commitments. And you? You feel something different, a strange quietude, almost embarrassing. While others elaborate endless lists of changes, you feel a silent desire, almost secret, to simply stop. To give up, not from weakness, but from an understanding you still cannot name. Albert Camus understood this experience in a unique way, and today we will explore why sometimes true wisdom lies not in promising more, but in deeply accepting what we are. There exists an extraordinary social pressure around the idea of constant improvement. We live in a culture that has transformed dissatisfaction into mandatory fuel, where being content with the present is almost heresy. Every cycle beginning brings with it this avalanche of expectations, as if we were obligated to reinvent our existence with each calendar that renews. It's fascinating to observe how we have become experts at creating future versions of ourselves, always more disciplined, more productive, more fulfilled. We build castles of intentions on foundations of discontent, and rarely pause to question whether this constant search for transformation might not itself be a form of escape. Camus saw in this compulsive need for improvement a refusal to accept the human condition as it is. For him, there was something profoundly absurd in this constant race toward an idealized self that perhaps never truly existed. But what happens when you simply don't feel this urgency for change? When you look at your life and, despite its imperfections, don't feel the desperate need to revolutionize everything? Our society has difficulty processing this attitude. It's interpreted as complacency, laziness, lack of ambition. You become suspect in the eyes of a culture addicted to movement, and yet there is something profoundly radical in this posture. There is a silent courage in looking at your existence, with all its contradictions and limitations, and simply saying, yes, this is what you are, and this is enough. Not because you gave up on growing, but because you understood that acceptance of the present is not the end of the journey. It is the only place where it can truly begin. Camus would call this lucidity, the capacity to see without the filters of excessive hope or paralyzing despair. The giving up we speak of here is not the surrender of the defeated, but the wisdom of one who finally stopped fighting windmills. It is the understanding that many of the battles we fight are against enemies we ourselves created. How many New Year's promises are, in reality, wars declared against fundamental aspects of who we are? How many goals are attempts to erase parts of our personality that we consider inadequate? This conscious giving up is a form of revolt, in the Camusian sense of the term. It is the refusal to accept that our validity as human beings depends on a constant process of self-improvement. It is the courageous affirmation that existing, simply existing with authenticity, is already a complete act in itself. Camus wrote about the absurd of the human condition, about how we seek meaning in a universe that seems fundamentally silent to our questions. And there is something absurd also in this culture of perpetual promises. We promise to become people we might not be capable of being. We create expectations based on idealized versions of ourselves, and then we punish ourselves when reality proves more complex and contradictory than our plans allowed. It's as if we were constantly trying to convince ourselves that we can escape our own humanity through willpower. But humanity is not something one escapes from. It is something one embraces, that one lives, that one accepts in all its magnificent imperfection. Think for a moment about the people around you who are always promising changes. There is in them a frenetic energy, a hurry that seems to hide something. It's as if they were running not toward something, but fleeing from something. And what they are fleeing from is frequently the simple and complex reality of being who they are. There is a strange beauty in observing someone who simply stopped running, who looks in the mirror without the urgent need to imagine an improved version reflected back, who wakes up in the morning without the mental list of all the aspects of themselves that need to be fixed before nightfall. This person didn't give up on life, they gave up on fantasy. And there is a fundamental difference between these two things. Fantasy tells us we are unfinished projects, eternally inadequate, always needing one more adjustment, one more improvement, one more effort to finally become acceptable. Reality tells us we are complete beings in our incompleteness, valid in our imperfection, sufficient in our insufficiency. Camus understood that accepting this reality was not pessimism, but a particular form of optimism. It was the confidence that life, as it is, already contains everything we need for an authentic existence. We don't need to transform ourselves into other people to deserve to be here. We already deserve it, simply by existing. Now I want to ask you a direct question, and I would very much like to know your answer in the comments. Have you ever felt this strange quietude I'm talking about? This moment when everyone around you is making promises and you simply don't feel this urgency? If so, leave a simple comment saying, "I feel this too." Because I believe many people go through this experience, but we rarely talk about it openly. Your response not only helps me better understand this question, but can also help other people feel less alone in this experience. You are not alone in this, and your perspective matters for our collective understanding of this phenomenon. There is a crucial difference between giving up on life and giving up on illusions about life. When someone says you are settling because you are not constantly reformulating yourself, what that person frequently doesn't understand is that you may have reached a place of genuine peace with who you are, not the peace of resignation, but the peace of active acceptance. Camus spoke about living without hope and without despair, a condition that our culture has difficulty processing because we are accustomed to thinking in terms of exacerbated optimism or paralyzing pessimism. But there exists a third state, more subtle and perhaps wiser, which is simply being present with what is, without the constant need for it to be different. This presence with what is doesn't mean passivity. It means a different form of action, an action that is born not from dissatisfaction or despair, but from acceptance. When you are not constantly spending energy fighting against fundamental aspects of your personality, you free that energy for other things, to create, to love, to contribute, to simply exist with more intensity in the present moment. There is something almost revolutionary in this attitude in a society that profits from our perpetual dissatisfaction. Entire companies exist to convince us that we are not enough as we are. And when you simply stop buying that narrative, you become a silent threat to an entire system based on planned inadequacy. The perpetual promise is also a form of existential procrastination. While we are always planning to become someone better in the future, we avoid the responsibility of being fully who we are in the present. It's easier to promise we will start meditating tomorrow than to meditate today. It's more comfortable to plan to become more patient next year than to practice patience in this moment. Promises give us the sensation of movement without the real discomfort of change. They are an elegant way to keep everything exactly as it is, while creating the illusion of progress. Camus would understand this as a form of bad faith, a refusal to fully assume responsibility for the present moment. When you give up on promises, you find yourself forced to deal with the immediate reality of your existence. There is no longer the consolation of the imaginary future where you will be different. There is only this moment, this person you are now, this life that is happening while you breathe. This can be scary at first, because it removes one of our main forms of escapism. But it can also be incredibly liberating. Without the constant pressure to become someone different, you can finally begin to discover who you really are. You can begin to live from your real authenticity, not from an edited and improved version of yourself that exists only in your imagination. There is a depth in people who stopped promising to others and to themselves. They develop a quality of presence that is rare and precious, because when you are not constantly divided between who you are and who you think you should be, you can be totally where you are. This totality of presence is something others perceive and are attracted to, even without knowing exactly why. It's the difference between someone who is always arriving and someone who is already there, between someone who is constantly preparing to live and someone who is living. But living without promises doesn't mean living without direction. It means your direction arises organically from who you are, not from who you think you should be. It means your actions are born from a deep understanding of your values and natural inclinations, not from a list of defects to be corrected. There is an elegance in this type of life, a fluidity that is impossible when you are constantly fighting against your own nature. Camus spoke about living in harmony with the absurd And perhaps part of that harmony is stopping trying to solve what is fundamentally unsolvable in the human condition. Our imperfection is not a bug that needs to be fixed. It is a feature of human existence. It is what makes us interesting, complex, capable of compassion and real connection with other equally imperfect beings. When you deeply accept your limitations, paradoxically, you also accept your real possibilities, not the fantastic ones. And your real possibilities are frequently richer and more interesting than any idealized version you could have imagined, because they are based on who you really are, not on who you think you should be. There exists something almost sacred in this acceptance. It is an act of profound honesty with yourself and with life. It is saying yes to your existence as it is, not as a background for something better that is coming, but as a complete and valid event in itself. This doesn't mean you stop growing or learning. It means your growth arises from a place of acceptance, not rejection. You grow not because there is something fundamentally wrong with you, but because it is in the nature of life to expand and express itself in new and creative ways. If this reflection resonates with you, if you identify with this experience of preferring authentic quietude to noisy promises, I would like to invite you to consider subscribing to the channel, not because I need numbers, but because I believe there exists a community of people who share this more contemplative perspective on life. People who value depth over speed, authenticity over perfection, presence over promises. If you are one of these people, your company on this journey would be very welcome. Together, we can explore these existential questions that rarely find space in our accelerated culture. Camus wrote that we must imagine Sisyphus happy, finding meaning not at the top of the mountain, but in the very act of pushing the stone. There is something profoundly consoling in this image when applied to our discussion today. Perhaps happiness is not in finally becoming the perfect person we promised to be. Perhaps it is in totally accepting the process of being who we are, with all the contradictions and imperfections that this implies. Perhaps the absurd is not something to be overcome, but something to be lived fully. When you stop making promises about who you will become, you can finally begin to celebrate who you already are. And there is much to celebrate, even though our culture teaches us otherwise. There is the courage to exist in a world that frequently seems to make no sense. There is the capacity to love despite the inevitability of loss. There is the ability to create beauty and meaning, even knowing that everything is temporary. There is the strength to continue even when answers don't come. These are not small achievements. They are the fundamental elements of a courageously lived life. The giving up of promises is, paradoxically, a form of promise. It is the promise to be real, to be present, to be true. It is the promise to stop running from yourself and to begin inhabiting yourself completely. It is the promise to find the extraordinary in the ordinary, the sacred in the everyday, the complete in the apparently incomplete. And perhaps this is the only promise really worth making, because it is the only one you can definitely keep. You can always choose to be who you really are in this exact moment, without excuses and without the need to become someone different first. So, while others make their elaborate promises about future transformations, perhaps your silent revolution is simply being here, being yourself, totally present with the magnificent and imperfect reality of your existence. It is not a lesser way of living. It is perhaps the most courageous of all, because it requires that you face life without the comforting masks of unfulfilled promises, without the protection of imaginary futures, just you and this moment, infinitely rich in its real possibilities.